Hello, my name is Luke.
And my name is Piers.
And welcome to On the Gallery Floor, a new contemporary art podcast where artists and audiences get to interview each other.
Yes, artists answer your questions while getting to ask some of their own too.
By bringing you closer to the artist and the artist closer to you, we hope to transform contemporary art's reputation from an inaccessible conundrum into an ordinarily relatable experience for all.
So, get your questions ready and meet us on the gallery floor. In this episode, we're talking to the curator, Ros Carter, whose exhibition, Pia Arke, Silences and Stories, is currently on show here at the John Hansard Gallery in Southampton. Silences and Stories, curated by Ros Carter, showcases the work of the late Danish Greenlandic artist, Pia Arke. In Ros's pioneering exhibition, you will discover an artist of international merit who, until now, has rarely been exhibited outside of the Scandinavian regions. Pia Arke, born 1958 to 2007, was an artist that questioned Greenland's collective culture and history through a personal perspective. She explored what she called the third space, the space in between opposites, in between the Inuit and the colonizer, the spoken and the unspoken, the personal and the political. Guided by Ros's meticulous curation, you will, like Pia herself, come to inhabit and better understand this third space while exploring silences and stories. Working with Pia Arke's estate, Ros has selected a number of standout works that celebrate Pia's legacy. Pia was a serious experimenter. Her artistic process was plentiful, involving the inexhaustible use and reuse of materials and subjects. One such photograph, a stark, moody, glacial landscape, appears throughout the exhibition. At first, it appears alone. Next, behind a self-portrait. Then it's covered with footprints. And finally, it's performed with, ripped up, stuck back together, written over, and rephotographed. Pia's work is so rich, so hands-on, you will be wanting to try out her processes for yourself. Ros has also included Pia's large-scale collaged maps, her sculpture to summon a mythical monster, and Pia's legendary camera house, a camera obscura recreated especially for Silences and Stories, which you can enter. An accompanying film program examining Greenland's colonial and environmental issues features in addition to the exhibition. Silences and Stories provides a rare opportunity for audiences to experience a compelling case for an artist's deserved recognition. By visiting, you too will help champion Pia Arke, ensuring her legacy inspires the artists and art lovers of today and tomorrow. Pia Arke, Silences and Stories, curated by Ros Carter, is showing until the 11th of May, 2024. Well, hello Ros, and thank you very much for joining us on the gallery floor today.
Thank you for having me.
We're in Gallery 2. We've got some questions for you. You've got some questions for us, and we have some questions from our audience as well. Are you ready?
Absolutely. Let's go.
Ros, our first question is, why Pia Arke and why exhibit her now?
I've had a long interest in the Arctic, in the far north. Done lots of travels, lots of Arctic adventures over the years. Quite often generated by my much better half, Julian. So between us, we've gone to all sorts of places across all the Arctic. But so at the beginning of 2014 was when I very first saw her stuff. And I just saw a couple of pieces that were in an amazing exhibition called Arctic at Louisiana Museum in Denmark. And those so that exhibition was like totally remarkable. There was something about her work that really kind of struck me, I suppose because it resonated so much with other artists I was interested in. So it was very kind of performative in nature. It looked at archives. It was kind of resonating with lots of feminist practice, lots of conceptual performative practice that I was interested in by other people, kind of identity, politics, artists who use the body, all of those kinds of practices that I already was very engaged with. So seeing somebody who I didn't know, who I'd never heard of, also making work like that was just really, really fascinating from a part of the world that obviously I didn't know a great deal about. So yeah, so seeing that work for the first time almost 10 years ago was kind of where it all started, really. And so her work made a real impression, and it kind of stuck with me. And I kind of thought, okay, yeah, I want to find out more about this artist. So bit by bit over time, just got more and more interested, would look up things. And then actually on another one of our trips to Greenland, was introduced to her ethnoaesthetics book. Mm-hmm. So that was really fascinating. So obviously that's like really key. One of the really key things that she did was write that book. So bit by bit, I kind of, it was a kind of drip kind of thing of just finding out little bits more as time went on. But yes, I say kind of that grew, and over time I kind of thought she's actually a really important artist who is just not known about in this country. And in fact, she's not known about across, many places outside of the Nordic countries. So it kind of felt, as time went on, more important to try and get some kind of focus or some kind of awareness of her, what she did, how significant she was, and how kind of ahead of her time she was, really, in the context in which she was working.
I imagine it's quite exciting for you, like in that moment in 2013, 2014, you see this person's artwork for the first time. I imagine there's an immediate spark in your brain where you're like, oh boy, yeah, I'm liking what I'm seeing. Where's this been the whole time?
Yeah.
And then going on that sort of journey of discovering who they are, what they made, what sort of messages they were looking to share with the world through their artwork. I don't know. I imagine that's, from a curating point of view, you're then like, oh, what's this new piece of work that I haven't seen before? Okay, we'll add that to the pile. Oh, there's some more here. Like, because it's been a long time coming that you've wanted to present this person.
I mean, you're constantly seeing things you haven't seen before, seeing the work of people that you don't know about. That is obviously part of what everyone encounters when they go to shows and things. Everyone's always discovering something new. But I suppose I've got the kind of good fortune of being in a role where potentially, it doesn't always happen, but potentially you see something really interesting and you kind of think, actually, I might be able to do something. I might, have some, I might be useful in some way to kind of do something.
Because I guess in terms of Pia's narrative, both when she was here and now, you get to say that you're part of that, which is, I imagine, quite a very powerful feeling as a curator and someone that appreciates her work. You get to be part of her story, which is,
yeah. I mean,
how do you feel about
that? That's massively daunting. It's an amazing thought, absolutely. I mean, it's obviously we're working with KW in Berlin, and Sophie, who's curating the show over there, both herself and I are very conscious, I think, of, you always have to be conscious of the responsibility you have when you do a show. you have a responsibility to the artist, you have a responsibility to the organisation, to the audience, to everybody really. You have, so you don't ever take on these things lightly at all.
There's an integrity behind the work and the artist.
You do absolutely have to be very mindful and sensitive to the work, to the people connected with it. So lots of the process is all about talking to people, finding out things. Obviously, we worked a lot with the estate. So the Pia Arke estate is run by her son, Soren. So, he was absolutely integral to the whole proceedings. So not only is he obviously responsible for ensuring the legacy of Pia Arke, but also, you're very conscious that this was his mum.
Mm.
You're dealing with very kind of personal connections, and lots of the people that we were talking with too. We've met some incredible people, curators, people connected in all sorts of different ways. And everybody has their own take on it. Everybody has their own, well, not everybody, but some people have their own kind of personal memories. So obviously we've been talking to some people who knew Arke personally. Then there are others who didn't necessarily know Arke, but they have very clear thoughts and ideas about her legacy and why her work was important.
So in terms of why Pia Arke and why now, is it that it's been such a long road meeting all these people, engaging with them, speaking with Soren, the estate, having those meaningful conversations? Like you say, it's his mum. This needs to be treated delicately and in a respectful way. I imagine that does take a long chunk of time in order to put together so that you can put something like the exhibition that we have on. Yeah. Is it just a time factor that it's coming out now, or is it a specific choice to come out?
No, it's so, as you say, it's been been brewing. It's been brewing away for quite some time. There's always a million very mundane, boring reasons why things happen at certain times. In terms of this, when I was first seeing her stuff years back, we were in the old building. We were looking forward to relocating. There was a whole period all around that kind of 2015, for a few years, that kind of period when, it was a movable feast, let's put it that way, in terms of programming, in terms of potentially moving to a new building. Mm-hmm. There was all sorts of, shenanigans going on, which meant that long-term planning kind of felt a bit tricky to undertake. And then, of course, we moved, and that was amazing. And, of course, we had a whole big kind of opening programme and all that kind of thing. And then COVID hit.
A wonderful pandemic.
So we all know what happened there. What with one thing and another. But actually, shortly before COVID, I remember having a chat with Woodrow, and kind of, and I just kept saying, I think we should really, really do this show. And Woodrow was incredibly supportive, and I'm always hugely grateful for that. And
how much did you bribe him?
That would be telling.
He likes the chocolate bits.
Which actually, I always, I'm always very conscious of the huge amount of trust actually that was displayed there, because, it's kind of going to, putting forward an artist who actually, to be honest, nobody in the organisation had ever heard of.
How do you sell that? How do you pitch something like that?
Yeah, so you are conscious that you're kind of, you know it, and you've met other people who know it, but actually the people that you're working with day to day, this is a new person. This is new stuff, and as I say, because she'd never particularly shown in the UK before, so like nobody in the UK had really had a chance to see any of these things. So yeah, there is a massive amount of trust needed a lot of trust needed on his part to say, yeah, okay,
let's do
go
this.
for it. Yeah, off you go. Get on with it.
If it goes wrong, it's your fault.
I think that's quite nice to hear, because that demystifies a little bit about how a curator works. Because I think before I knew anything about curating, I thought, well, the curator decides, and that's the last line. But that you need support, and people need to gather around you and help you, like you're helping.
Absolutely,
tell Pia's story too. I think that's quite a humbling experience. It tells us a bit more about what curation is like.
You're like this little cog in the middle of a big old machine, and you have to keep the rest of the machine going, but you're like this little kind of you're this like little kind of key bit in the middle of it.
Is that let's put it this way, a sort of style choice from you? Because there are other curators out there that would put on a show like this, and it also have a lot to do with them and their taste and their spin on it. How do you find being neutral in that respect, or actually pushing for the artist's integrity rather than say this be a massive thing for you too, like a big Ros party?
Well, that's a terrifying thought, isn't it? I think at the end of a process like this, you just want to feel as though you've done the right thing. You want to just feel that you've done someone justice, really. And I desperately hope that this show has done Pia justice, because that absolutely was my that's the driving force behind the whole thing, really. And as I say, it's very different doing a show like this than it is working with, an artist who's around and alive and who very much is guiding how they want their work shown.
Well, I think that, if you don't mind, I think that takes us nicely onto our second question, in that, can you tell us about Pia's use of multiple mediums and how you even make a selection when the artist isn't even here? Because we're so familiar with artists coming in, choosing where stuff's going, maybe making an adjustment like live in the building. This is a totally different ballgame in this situation. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Kind of at the heart of it, you're wanting to do best by the work, and you want to do best by the artist. That's always at the heart of everything. But of course, with a show where you're not actually working with the artists themselves, it is a very different thing. And that's when you really do, because you can't talk to the artist. I can't talk to Pia. I can't ask her specific questions. I can't, have that direct connection. So you have to find that connection through other routes. And that's why talking to all of these other people is so crucial. That's why connecting with Soren is so crucial. That's why kind of all of that research and all of that kind of just listening and connecting up is kind of critical. But so in terms of making this show, because this is like the first show in the UK, it felt totally appropriate for it to be quite general, as in not talking about one very specific aspect of what she does. So it feels like it felt totally appropriate to be kind of like just a kind of overview, a kind of survey, I suppose, of what she did. It doesn't cover every single thing she did. So our focus has been primarily on her photographic practice, her archival practice, the performative side of what she did, appropriated photography, all of those kind of things. So there is a kind of a selection process that goes on, absolutely. So it doesn't represent every single thing she ever did. But yeah, so I did kind of hone it to a degree. But in terms of the timeline, it covers pretty much her entire kind of career. So we've got a very early piece from the late 80s. And then we've kind of got things that go right up to, kind of towards the mid-2000s when she died. But so in terms of timeline, it covers it covers pretty much the whole timeline of when she was making work. And of course, there's always, so you have to have a sense of what works make sense together. And actually, just because works are all done by one person doesn't mean that you just, if you bung them all in one room, it's going to make sense.
They don't all fit together
all
of a sudden.
So you do have to think about, what works make sense, what works tell a story, I suppose. Of course, there's always a multitude of practicalities to contend with. So you're always having to think about what actually is feasible, what is available. Not all works will be available. So, you can't just presume that you can have whatever you like. That it doesn't work like that. You have to, there's an awful lot of practical things that kind of come into the mix in terms of what's possible and what isn't. Obviously, you talk a lot with lenders. So a lot of her work now is within collections. Most of it's within Denmark in different either museum collections or private collections. Some of things are in Sweden, some things are in Greenland. And there are some things further afield as well, but those are the primary countries where the works are held. Plus, Soren, of course, still has works as well. So he holds the archive, he holds some works. So basically, you have to do a lot of detective work, and you have to kind of basically find out what is where, try and get visuals of it, because you're not going to be able to physically see everything. So you have to do an awful lot of background rummaging to find out what exists where, what's possible, what isn't possible, what would work together. And kind of reasonably early on, you have to have a sense of the spaces and how you're going to use the spaces. Because you have to kind of think, okay, I've got this space, that space, what can I do, what can't I do? Obviously, upstairs, we've got the 3 main spaces that the exhibition takes up. But one of those, we can't put any loans in because we've got too much daylight in it. So, from the outset, we knew that actually only 2 spaces could actually have any loans put in them. And then you think, okay, so we've got a 3rd space. We can't put any original artworks in there, but it's a really key space in the show. So what we're going to do in it, you do have to. Not only are you navigating what is where, what is available, you then have to think, how is that work actually going to work in our spaces? What can we do? What can't we do? What makes sense? What would work together? What doesn't work together? So there's an awful lot. It's a big old jigsaw.
I don't think I want to be a curator anymore. This sounds like a no.
Make note of this, Piers. Start crossing stuff out.
So much to consider.
Yeah,
there is a lot to think
huge
about.
amount.
Yeah.
Was there ever a version of the show in the previous building that you had in your mind?
Oh,
well, obviously. So part of my research, which it always sounds a bit pretentious to say research. Basically, one of my wonderful trips to Copenhagen.
I wish I could be doing research.
We're going on a lad's research trip.
Wink, wink.
I know. Sitting, eating cinnamon buns and drinking coffee was a good way of doing research. So on one of my trips back in 2021, there was a big show organised by Louisiana Museum in Denmark. And that was a major show that they toured within Denmark itself. So it was shown at 2 other venues as well within Denmark. Anyway, so 2021 was when that tour started. And I did obviously this was like it was in the kind of, still in the tail end of the pandemic kind of travel restriction.
The aftershocks.
Nightmares. Yeah. So going to Denmark at that time did feel a little bit of a, should I, shouldn't I, can I, can't I kind of dilemma. But the fact that they were doing a big show of Arke, I just thought, well,
it's got to be done.
I'm going.
I have to. This is craziness. I cannot not go to it. If I'm serious about doing a show, I have to go and see this thing that Louisiana have done. So, yeah, I kind of had to, piddle around with tests and all that stuff. It was at the time when travelling was just an utter nightmare doing your tests and all those travel things. But I thought, no, it has to be done. It's too important not to go. So I did go to Louisiana at the end of 2021 and saw their show there. And importantly as well, I connected up with Anders Kold, who's the curator of the show. He's one of the senior curators at Louisiana. And he was like a really, really key person to connect up with, because he just gave me so much brilliant advice and help. He talked me around their show. I just obsessively took pictures of absolutely everything, wrote obsessive notes, just basically kind of, was like a little sponge and just like soaked up everything that was in their show.
I have seen your research folder. It is extensive.
So the show at Louisiana was really, really crucial in the whole process. So seeing that show and what they did was really, really invaluable. And it was the first time I had seen all of that work all together, because I'd only ever seen little bits and bobs prior to that. So being immersed in that quantity of work all together just was like massively, massively important. And then, of course, it was a tour. So it then did go to 2 other venues within Denmark, one of which was Kunstmuseum Brandts in Odense. And I then went back to Denmark and saw it in its saw the same exhibition in its different iteration at Kunstmuseum Brandts. And that was slightly smaller, just because of space. But I connected up with Mariana Aya, who's the curator there. Spent a lot of time talking to her. And she was like really, really fantastic. So basically it was kind of talking to those key people who had worked with the work and getting them to talk about it, about what they'd done.
Did any of these people get to meet Pia? I imagine that might have been an interesting insight for you.
They would. No, I don't think they would have known her. No, I don't think so. I hope I'm not talking out of turn, but I don't think they did.
Well, I would say this is a nice little segue into our next question, because you would have been questioning people who you were working with, but as you said earlier, Pia isn't here. So what questions would you have for Pia if she was still alive today?
I don't know. Yeah, that's a really tricky one. There would have been all sorts of things that would be amazing. Well, it would be amazing just to hear her talk about stuff, really. But I mean, there's a few things. I don't know if I've got like specific questions, but I think there's topics that it would be interesting to know what she would make of or think about now. I think probably one of the most obvious ones in relation to Greenland is obviously all the environmental issues, the major environmental issues going on in Greenland. Because obviously in her work, her work was primarily made in the 90s, early 2000s. As we know, all of those environmental things were happening then. It was all brewing. All these problems were kind of starting to accumulate, but it was not as high up the agenda as it is now. I think probably in the 90s, people were, talking about holes in ozone layers and things like that.
Classic.
Yeah. So, that kind of thing was talked about, of course. And environmental scientists and all sorts of other people would have been, knowing what was going on. But in terms of it being like a major kind of environmental or catastrophe that everyone's kind of hurtling towards, it wasn't talked about in those terms. It wasn't referred to that much. So yeah, actually within her work, she doesn't, well, as far as I read it anyway, she doesn't directly address environmental issues in that sense. But of course, it's, lots of her work is about a country that is absolutely at this, is one of the key locations that's being so dramatically affected. So I think it would be interesting to talk to her about it, to get her take on what is happening to Greenland as a country in light of the shift and the impact that environmental change is having on it as a country. Because, of course, and I know you covered some of these subjects when you were chatting with Julian, but sorry, we're kind of playing the same record, aren't we, a little bit? But yeah, obviously there's the physical, geological, geographical, weather impact. There's all of those kind of things which are very kind of tangible in terms of the landscape and the place. The ice loss is obviously huge, absolutely huge. But it's also, so there's the physical aspect of it, but then there's the economical impact. And actually, there's the whole economic, political scenario that comes hand in hand with that ice loss. And yeah, so the ice loss in itself, it's not just a physical thing. It's a thing that is actually changing Greenland as a country in all ways. So, actually what it's doing kind of perversely is, so on the one hand, we've got, ice loss, we've got retreating glaciers, we've got, ice sheet shrinking, all of those kind of things. But of course, that in turn reveals the land, it reveals what's underneath. And what's underneath is like so massively valuable for mining purposes. So, Greenland as a source of all manner of different minerals and resources is huge. So, yeah, so what actually seems to be happening is that as the ice retreats, it actually opens up opportunities for Greenland to have more of an economy, more of a sustainable economy based on mining, really. Obviously there are other economies within Greenland as well, but the issuing of mining licenses and all of that kind of thing is kind of one of the main things that Greenland can build an independent economy on. So that's the real. So none of these scenarios are straightforward. There's these massive, kind of ethical and environmental dilemmas inherent in all of these situations. So, in order for a country like Greenland to become independent, they have to be economically independent.
Sure.
And to become economically independent, they have to have a sustainable economy of their own.
Mm.
And if that is basically enabled by ice loss, then you've got really contradictory things going on. So it's not straightforward at all.
Yeah.
The current kind of scenario in Greenland.
Do you think Pia would have been making work to?
Well, this is one of those. Yeah, I mean, who knows? Yeah, and anything that I might say is obviously massively speculative, and I would have no idea what her thoughts would be. But I mean, I think it's it would feel inevitable. I think anybody engaging with contemporary Greenland, those are, it's one of the things that is so kind of obviously happening that you kind of can't help but kind of engage with it in some way. So that whole kind of way in which Greenland is shifting, both environmentally and politically, it's a very excuse the metaphor, it's a very shifting landscape. It's a very shifting thing, and it's a very complex thing. There's no clear these are not kind of black and white scenarios. It's a big old kind of grey mass of complexities and contradictions and multiple interests from external influence, huge multinationals wanting to come in and mine parts of Greenland. There's that's just one that's just one element of what's going on. But yeah, I mean, it's a contemporary Greenland is a very complex picture, and it's not a straightforward.
Well, speaking of
sort of not a straightforward place to talk about in that respect.
Speaking of complex pictures, Pia's method of making work, you could argue, for someone that isn't really familiar with what she does to make her images, they may see that as quite complex. Is there anything that you've seen in the work that she's made that you're like, how on earth did you do that? Like, do you have questions about the work that she's made at all? Like, is there anything that you've seen on display that you're just completely perplexed by at all? Even in this show, or anything that you've seen in your researching?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know whether perplexed is how I'd feel. Like, I'm fascinated.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, because the way in which she works was kind of resolutely analogue, there is a clear process behind what she did. In a physical sense, there are physical processes that she adopted that, ended up in, the works that are on the walls. So in that sense, there are kind of tangible processes that you could think, okay, so she did this and then she did that. So you can kind of find your route through it in a practical sense. But of course, the whys and wherefores are the much more elusive things to kind of grasp hold of. So yeah, the kind of the reasons why she did certain things are the things that are kind of can be more elusive at times. But I would love to have, seen her in action, as it were, with some of, making some of those beautiful little self-portraits, and the way in which she kind of played with layering, and both in the photography and in the collages and various things, that kind of layering of process. So kind of, having a background, then layering on something else, then layering on something else, and building up an image out of these kind of multiple elements over a period of time. I think her process was just really kind of beautiful in lots of the works. And like the Legend series, like the big set of collages. I would have loved to have seen how she kind of actually, worked on those maps that kind of lie at the background of all of those pieces.
If Pia was still here, I wonder whether you may have even had the chance to be featured in one of the works as well, because she seems to, from my research, include a lot of her friends. And in the video is it by Gallery 11? Yeah. It's her and the art historian friend.
Yeah, so that's a television. That was a television program. So yeah, Gallery 11 was a television program on Danish telly. She was very collaborative in nature. She did a lot of things with other people. I think lots of her work was a very kind of social process. I mean, obviously there are certain, certain works that are kind of her, self-portraits.
Yeah.
Where her own kind of body is the focus. But she did an awful lot of work that was with other people. So, like the piece we're sitting in front of is Three Graces. One of the people in that is her cousin. So Carola is her cousin, and then Suzanne Mortensen is the other woman of the three.
Which person's the cousin? Sorry, just so you...
So the cousin, Carola, is on this image is the person that's just on the far right. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So, Suzanne Mortensen is the person who's got the glasses. But yeah, so she did lots of works that were with other people. And actually, Suzanne Mortensen, she did an amazing series of works that aren't in this show just because we don't have the space. But another set of works called Nature Mort or Perlustrations, which will be shown at KW. So that's great that those will be part of the next show. Because Suzanne Mortensen and Pia both ultimately died of breast cancer. And the Perlustrations series there was a number of photographs she did in that series, but some of that was absolutely connecting to her friend Suzanne and her kind of a journey, I suppose, through treatment for breast cancer. So there were lots of times in which she kind of worked closely with other people. And obviously some of them manifest themselves in her work, so some of them feature. But actually lots of other kind of things she undertook, like the story from Scoresby Sund book that she made, all of that was done through her connecting with people. So all of that was done back in Scoresby Sund, which is now called Itokotomit. Sorry, apologies for my horrendous.
Ros is looking at Luke and I like, yeah. No, we know what it is.
I wouldn't know how to say that at all.
I said that completely wrong. So apologies to anyone who listens who knows better than I do how to pronounce it. Anyway, terrible pronunciation aside, the work that she did on the place that she's born was very much a social process. So that took place over a number of years, and she toed and froed with all of these amazing kind of archival photos and documents and all that kind of thing that she kind of took back to her kind of birthplace, and bit by bit pieced together the history of the town and how it had come into being, and all the people that were documented in all of these kind of archival photos. And of course, that was a whole process for her of talking, with relatives, with friends, with people that were in the town. So that was a very kind of social process. The whole pulling together of that stories from Scoresby Sund was like a massively social process. But yeah, as Piers was saying, some of the footage of her using the camera obscura is very social. You know, she would.
Oh yeah, definitely.
She would be with other people using it in different places. You know, either in Greenland or in Denmark.
Well, even just having the inauguration for the camera
yeah,
house,
absolutely,
incredibly social.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, she was. She was definitely somebody who connected up a lot with other people throughout, you know, all of her work.
I think this is what is so good about this show, and what is so good about Pia is, I mean, I've had the fortune to show around a few art students recently, and her work is so plentiful and so filled with potential. It's one of these works that essentially provides you with a template of how to be a really brilliant artist. Like, she did everything, and for her it seemed like it wasn't just about being on her own, even though of course respectfully she has her self-portraits, but yeah, very much being a part of the community, working with people, collaborating. Yeah, sort of what more can you ask for from an artist?
Yeah, and she was like massively experimental. So yeah, I mean, going back to your question way back about her different kind of mediums that she worked in. Yeah, I mean, she was hugely experimental, and she started off painting, and she didn't actually ever particularly stop painting. We haven't included paintings in this show, but other shows have included some. You know, she did painting, she did illustrations for, you know, kind of an airline menus, and, you know, she did all sorts of bits and bobs as an artist, especially when she was kind of starting out. And then she went to college, starting off with painting, but then moving into photography, and then of course, she kind of really ran with that one, in terms of making her camera obscura, and so there's all sorts of things, and then the whole thing of undertaking massive amounts of research into, you know, her own history. You know, so she was one of those very early examples, I suppose, of kind of an artist as research, you know, as a researcher. And yeah, that was as much, you know, all of those delvings into archives was just as important as her self-portraits, or just as important as, you know, her Arctic Hysteria performance piece, or you know, whatever piece you kind of want to choose. You know, all of that research into archives and stuff was just as important as everything else. So yeah, so she really did kind of stretch, you know, her practice in all sorts of different directions, in a really kind of fascinating way.
Well, Ros, thank you very much for that, and I hope that this can lead us nicely on to part 2 of our episode. You have some questions for us, so please do fire away, and we'll give you more info.
Well, as you can tell, I'm not very good at actually posing succinct questions, but one thing I was wondering was, all of this work that's obviously in the show is, as we were saying, resolutely analogue. But is there parts of the show that make you kind of yearn to get back into the dark room? And has it kind of inspired any either new thinking or revived previous thinking about the process of actually making photographs, and photographs being objects in themselves as opposed to a digital file? So really it's kind of a way of reflecting on the kind of dramatic change over the last kind of 20 years or so in how photographs are actually made and thought about. And, you know, I mean, there's a part of me that thinks, am I just being a bit nostalgic? But I mean, I think it is important to reflect back on how photographs were considered, and still are considered, I'm sure, as kind of unique and precious things in their own right.
Definitely.
So I think it's that whole thing of, what has the show potentially either made you think or revived?
Well, who better to answer than
about
our resident photographer?
making
Mr. Luke.
photos.
Well, okay. So, as a little bit of background for anyone that is listening that doesn't know, again, similar thing where you don't want to be called the curator. I don't like necessarily being called a photographer because I feel like that puts an unsaid level of pressure on you to be like, you know how to take a picture. It's like when someone hands you a phone at like an event and they're like, do you just want to take a picture for us? And I'm like, this isn't what I'm used to.
Do I have to?
I don't want to. You're not paying me. Yeah, so I initially started with digital. I was a filmmaker to begin with back in college. Rep Barton Peveril for anyone that's listening. Started with a moving image, and then I did a foundation year, and that's when I first started doing photography. I have a twin sister, Rebecca, if you're listening. I did not copy you, which you'd like to tell me that I did. She did work in the darkroom, and I knew about the darkroom through her, and she had a very much a fine art approach to photography. And mine was very much taking pictures of bugs and plants and nature and stuff. And that was all on digital, and I didn't really venture into film until I got to university. I tried a little bit in the darkroom, but didn't do anything too crazy. And yeah, my foundation year was the turning point of going from film to photography. And now, since university, I remember the day that I got to use a medium format camera. It blew my mind. I went home that day. I went and bought one on eBay for like 400 quid or something. Didn't know I had to pay tax on it when it came into the country, though. That was annoying. But I cannot tell you the change that made for me as a maker of images. It was unlike anything that I had experienced before. I think going from digital to analog, if anyone that's listening that wants to actually get into photography and is intrigued by using a camera and sort of capturing their eye moving forward, take the time to use film when you can, and if it's appropriate for you. I totally understand in the landscape that we're in now, it's very expensive to get into film. And yeah, good God, what a hobby to have with an expensive price tag. But it's so worth it. There's a level of slowing down that you can see in Pia's work, not only from the fact that she's using pinhole photography to take hour-long exposures, but in the decision making and the capturing of an image on film. And it sounds a little bit like I'm blowing smoke up my own bum, but honestly, knowing that you only have 10 images per roll of film on medium format makes you think so much more thoughtfully, more critically of what you're photographing than anything that you could do with a digital camera. I think you can take, like my digital camera I use for any paid work, emphasis on paid work only being digital, for me at least. I can take like 20 images in a second. But on film, I've got 10 photos, and I'm looking around. I like taking pictures of trees, for anyone that doesn't know. I have to think about how I want it framed, what I want to cut out. I have to spend way more time in the viewfinder because there might be some little weirdo in the background that I've not seen.
It's me.
It's probably
It's me.
Piers. Yeah, it's probably
It's
Piers.
always Piers.
And that's what I enjoy. I think there's I'm blessed by the fact that trees don't walk around and move, because otherwise I'd be having a real nightmare. But that feeling of slowing down and really absorbing that feeling of the process, and that's essentially what Pia's work, that's what resonates with me most in Pia's work, is she is so embedded in the process. And I find that equally, that's what does it for me. I think I'm taking the time, I'm slowing down, it's like my eyes are the sponge and I'm really just soaking it all in. And you can see that in her work. I think the pinhole stuff, the idea of coming up with, it's called the camera house.
Yeah.
Like having that house tagline says that it's somewhere that you want to be inhabiting. You want to be in there. And I don't know if anyone's had any history with pinhole work, but it's usually you get like a tiny little box. And it's fun. It's good fun. But if you have the opportunity, please come down. In Gallery 3, we have a reconstruction of the camera house that was built by Pia, that she toured around Greenland to some extent. It's here. You can try it out. You can go inside. Knowing that you're inside the thing that is taking the photograph. Oh, ooh, it's so cool.
Yeah.
It's so cool because it's just a tiny hole in a box and that records an image. Like it just blows my mind. I love it. I don't even know how to like express how cool it is. For someone that is, I'm very much into the technical element of photography. That's what I enjoyed so much about the medium format camera. I could take the whole thing apart bit by bit and then put it back together again. Going in the darkroom, developing that way is so much cooler than just printing it out of a computer. Don't get me wrong, I scan my images now because I don't have access to a darkroom. But, oh boy, this is like, I don't even know what to describe it as. I won't say that because we're family friendly. It's very exciting to see someone so embedded in that sort of mentality of the technical and the process. I think that's just something that I really enjoyed. And it's definitely come back to me more so. Getting back to your question, I went on a right tirade there. Coming back to your question, I've bought more films since this show started than I have ever done previously. I've wanted to go out more. I've wanted to bring people with me. Every time I've gone out to take pictures, I've brought someone with me. And they've joined in, they've had their own camera and they've been taking images as well. It's just, yeah, it's like a love letter to photography in a way. That's how it feels to me as someone that's used it.
Well, the fact that she wanted to quite literally be in the middle of the process. She is physically in the thing. Well, obviously not every work is made with the pinhole camera, but lots of the key works in the show have been made through that process. And the fact that, she physically was in it. She is physically like performing as part of that photographic process.
Well, she makes making, I'm not going to be family friendly here. I think she makes making very seductive. It really makes you want to go away and make yourself. For me, that's a great way to judge a successful exhibition and a very interesting artist is if when you visited, you go home or you're wanting to go home and make it and try it out yourself. So I'm totally with you there. And I'm not even a photographer.
Well, I mean, so how's it made you feel?
Well, I mean, like the last time I took a film photograph would have been in Cornwall and it was on a disposable camera. But getting I would have got the negatives and anyway, I would have got the photo back, and that was really amazing. And I loved seeing like a hair in the lens, and that wouldn't have been processed or something because it comes up white. But otherwise, I think the thing I really relate to in Pia's work, I think, is trying to capture a particular landscape. Call it an obsession. But there's a place near me, and I keep coming back to this, not so much in photography, but in my own artistic practice. But I really relate to Pia's The Point, this really incredible, moody, glacial landscape. And I can see that there was something still there for her. And what's really lovely is, or the way I think about artistic processes is, this is somebody trying to capture something, but it never really satiates. So she will do it again, and maybe the next time she'll get the thing she's really trying to get towards, and then she has to do it again and again and again because it never really lasts. So it just shows you that this person is still super hungry for this really maybe elusive element in the work. So for me, I think most artists can relate to that, but makes her work very exciting. It's sort of work I would eat if I could. But also, she makes me think about what makes a compelling image, why we're drawn to images, and sort of echoing what Luke said about buying film. I am now 100% an advocate for more access to photo studios and dark
Oh,
rooms.
God, yeah.
Because I have never done... Oh, I did it at Rep Barton Peveril as well. And I was doing photogrammetry, whatever that is.
Photograms, yeah.
Photograms, yeah. But I would want to go back and try that. This is an exhibition that if you're, I think of any age, you come in and see it, it makes you think, okay, yeah, well, how do I do this? I want to do it. I want to handle it. I don't just want to send it off to, Boots. I don't just want to send off my film to Boots and get that done. I want to learn a new skill.
Butcher it.
Yeah. So, yeah, Boots won't be sponsoring this episode. But definitely, and she provides such a really interesting template, I think, for making images. And I think her method is really good. So for me, even though I'm not a photographer, her use of collage is something that I'm considering in my own work now. So yeah, she's super inspiring.
One of the amazing things she does is she makes photography like a sensory experience. It becomes something about being physically in a place, physically in camera obscura. The smell. Like the first thing I and it's been a long time since I ever was in a photographic darkroom. But even given that it was a long time ago, the minute I saw some of that footage of her, like the smell of developer.
Oh, wow. I know, yeah.
Like it's got such a distinctive smell. And that smell immediately, as soon as I watched her kind of like swishing around images in a developing tray, that smell just like hit me. It was just really odd. So yeah, the whole idea of photography being a very sensory thing, which I think sometimes perhaps it isn't thought of as. But, when you do kind of darkroom process, it is very sensory. It's all about really fine nuancing of things. It's about smelly fluids.
I completely agree.
About, it's about being in the dark. It's about, it's all sorts of things. It's a very bodily, sensory thing to make a photograph. And I think that's what she kind of conveys kind of so beautifully as well.
And the photographs as objects are treated quite physically. Luke and I were looking through before setting up today, and there's fingerprints, there's creases, there's rips, there's dog-eared corners. I think having a photograph as a physical object, I'm not sure why, but that's quite exciting as well. And I think it's because she goes one step further. It's not just displayed perfectly. She'll then use that photograph not just as an image, but as a physical object. So she'll another thing.
She'll mangle it around and
she'll
then rip it up.
Do something else. Do something else. Yeah, it's just endless. It's endless.
Yeah.
I'm shaking at the thought of my negatives being ripped up and thrown around. Yeah. But that's just me. That's how I work. And I just wanted to add that just at before we go on to your next question, Ros. Yeah, the idea of the negative being so much more precious compared to anything. Like obviously the rise of phones and camera phones has put a level of, I don't know if insignificance is the word, but an image on your phone is far less precious, in my opinion, than a physical negative that, you're not even going to see if the picture looks any good until you get it back. I find that very exciting.
But there's that time lapse, isn't there? Like you take a picture, you don't see what it's like for another 2 weeks.
I love that. I love it. And I feel like in some ways you relinquish any form of, I know I was saying I'm quite particular leading up to taking the image, but as soon as that image is taken, it's out of your hands now. You roll on to the next one and then you start again. But
it's quite exciting that.
Oh, there's a rush, Piers. I'm telling you, there's a rush. There's something about it. As soon as you hear that mirror shut or the shutter click, you're like, you get, especially if you're feeling it up until that point, you've got a vibe in yourself and you're like, oh man, I can't wait.
With digital, you never get the experience of imagining what this picture will be like.
No, exactly.
And it's just taken, that's it. It does make you think, I wonder what Pia would have thought of camera phones and her take on digital photography, or very instant digital photography as it is today.
Well, and it's because we haven't, if you consider how many images you can take on a roll of film as the memory of that roll of film, we're now in an age with unlimited memory, essentially. I know it has a number, but we are at a point where it doesn't matter how many images you've taken. You can keep taking more, whether that's on cloud storage, or you've got an external memory card, or whatever it is. You've got 258 gigabytes on your phone. It's unreal. You can just keep taking, but knowing that you have 10, or if you're in large format, you've got one image per sheet of film, you better put some effort in, because although it's taken on film, it doesn't mean it's gonna be good, if that makes sense. Like, just because you're using an analog technique or something that is considered as arty, quote unquote, it doesn't mean it's going to be successful, if that makes sense.
I liked what you said about being more critical when you're taking a picture because of the time,
because
of the limitations.
And I think you're more critical of your own decision making, because it's weird when I go out and I see a tree that I like, I kind of have to like look it up and down and start doing the circling around it and be like, ooh, look at this angle. And then I can as soon as I get it in the camera, I'll start looking at it. And then immediately I'm like, oh, maybe not. And there's a constant frustration for me in particular. I imagine many photographers share this as well. We all maybe do. I see something with my own eyes that sometimes I just struggle to recreate through the lens. And I find that incredibly frustrating.
Mm.
And maybe Pia found a sense of comfort knowing that she was in the image, and that sort of feeling of, I can't quite get what I'm seeing, but being in it, whether that's in the house or she's cutting it up and collaging, tearing it up, walking on it, footprints, maybe having that sort of final impression on the image, whether that's physically or standing in front of the hole in the pinhole camera, something.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Well, especially with the camera obscura, it's like the photographs that were produced from that are just, totally different to an image that you would even get on just a film camera, let alone a digital camera. So actually it's a representation of that place, but it's not a, inverted commas, a photographic facsimile of the place. It's got all the features. It's got, it's got the, it's got all the kind of stones on the ground. It's got the ice in the sea. It's got the hilly bits next to it. All of those elements are there in the picture, but visually it looks very different to how it would be represented using a different method.
Yeah.
So there is a very kind of, there's a total uniqueness to every single individual picture that was made with camera obscura. Like, you can't replicate it. Like, nothing can, literally, she would take a picture, that would be it. That would be the only picture of that particular thing at that particular moment. It's not going to be replicated. It's not going to become a digital file. It's not. It's going to.
You can see
stay
then
as a physical one-off of that particular place.
But of course, she'd do it again, and so you can see why. That being so alluring, you wouldn't just want one, even though the last one's going to be different from the next one and the next one and the next one.
Right, Ros. Let's go on to question 2.
Oh, hello. Right.
Lovely.
Okay. One thing that was surprising when developing this show was the either kind of limited knowledge or awareness I came across about Greenland itself, both as a country with an indigenous population and a complex colonial history, but also as a contemporary country with challenging political and socio-economic issues. So has the show made you think about the far north, or Greenland at least, in a new way, and as an inhabited living place with its own people, places and politics, rather than just a source of headlines about climate change and melting glaciers, as it's often depicted?
Okay, I'm going to try and tackle this first. So, before this show, I think my knowledge of Greenland, I'm going to focus mostly on Greenland only because of the experience that I'll mention in just a second. I was only really familiar with Greenland as a place from just seeing it on maps and stuff. I hadn't really paid much attention to anything in the north. I think it just wasn't something that came up in class at school or talking with friends, that sort of thing. And then when was it? Not last year, the year before that. I went on a trip to Boston in America, and we did a changeover flight. So we went to Iceland, and then we went from Iceland to Boston. And on that second flight from Iceland to Boston, we flew over Greenland, and oh my God, it was maybe one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. I think we were flying, luckily it was like no cloud coverage at all, so you could just see straight down. I started seeing all these little white pellets. They look like pellets from up high, but I imagine they were a lot bigger. Just sort of sprinkled in the water. And I'm like, bloody hell, what's that? It's a bit weird. And then they started getting bigger. And then I realized, okay, it's a lot of ice, lots and lots of ice. And then we started getting closer and closer. And those masses of ice turn into land, huge sheets. And it looked like if you've ever laid fondant icing on a cake and you get ripples in the icing, it looked like that from way up high. And it was incredible. But then I was just thinking, how does anyone live here? This is insane. Like, it doesn't look like an environment that anyone would be able to maintain, live through year on year on year. And I don't remember us flying past any part that I couldn't see like towns or anything. So then having that experience, seeing how incredibly beautiful it was and vast, like the amount of ice and snow was incredible. And just the way it changed from sea ice little pellets, ice chunks. Oh boy. Okay, we're getting into the landmass now. It was incredible. It's maybe some of my favorite stuff I've had on a phone. Admittedly, this is a moment when phone photography and phone cameras are very handy. I can't just start cramming my Mamiya into the window of an airplane. Yeah, it was just gorgeous. And it was sort of like, I don't know, I was appreciating it more so of like a visual texture kind of thing at the time, just because I was like a gawking baby out of a window. Oh my God, wow. I've never seen, it was like the third time I've been on a plane, so it was very exciting. Yeah, and I think now seeing this show and seeing an artist that has spent so much time, but it's part of her life, it's amazing to see such a different perspective, up high, completely devoid of any personal identity of people, to then be brought down to ground level and experience it through the eyes of an artist, and in photography, no less. I don't know, it completely changed how I saw the place and how I now, I mean, I would love to go. I think more than anything, I think if anything, it's sort of like thrown a hook into the water of where I want to go, just to get that juxtaposition of me seeing it with some crazy landscape that I could never imagine. I was just thinking, how does anyone walk on this? That's insane. To now seeing it like it is here in this room. Yeah.
And you'd take your camera, wouldn't you? You'd take your film camera.
I would take my camera. I've got my own camera house. It's called a camera bungalow. It's a tiny little thing. Yeah, I'm just thinking of, I would love to take pictures of this place. That's essentially, it's hard to break away from, well, while in a photography exhibition, break away from the idea of taking pictures of this place. I'm, what's the word? Enamored by the landscape more than anything.
Yeah, it does definitely kind of get into your soul.
Really.
Yeah,
I think so.
I don't think you can go there and come back unaffected.
Yeah.
I think you'd have to have a heart of stone, I think, to go there and not come back feeling as though it's somehow got into your bones.
I mean, I've not even been there, and just being around this show, I mean, Greenland, it remains a mystery to me. However, I feel with the show, I get a real deep psychological sense of what Greenland would be, even though I've not been there. So for me, it's elusive. It's always slipping away. It's dark. It's magical. It's formidable. It resists being captured. It's a place that's much larger than any photograph or any concept in your mind that you could have. It's I was thinking about this, is it's like a big unfathomable thing or monster, or even in like something like, I don't know if this would be part of it, but you think of like Norse mythology, you think it's like a big giant that's resting its head somewhere. But I will say what it has done, and this is going to be a one-time only special segment called Piers' poorly put together Greenland facts. Because I have gone on a rather interesting research trip to Google.
This is very exciting.
This is exciting. So I didn't realise, this was sort of inspired by, we had someone from Denmark come on Saturday, and she was saying that it was a really amazing place to visit, and that she was really taken by that there were roads that lead to nowhere. So did you know that, transportation is very, very different over in Greenland than it is over here. So there are only roads in settlements. Same with railways. People use boats more, and flight is a big thing. So
they can fly.
They can.
They've got superpowers.
There are big birds over in Greenland. Did you know that over 80% of the populace, I think it's actually 88% of the populace, is Inuit? It's also quite a rich country, ranking higher than Austria, Germany, and the United Arab Emirates.
Wow.
I hope that's true.
Okay. I hope that's true.
That's what Google was telling me.
How you spin your economic.
Inuit hunters invented the kayak.
Wow.
That's something. Lowest population density. Home to the largest national park in the world, which is like the top right of Greenland, if you're viewing it from a western sort of side.
Do you have a figure of how big it is?
I don't.
That's the limitations of your fact finding.
But I'm not Ros. And
a declarative statement with no facts.
Anybody who wants to hire me in the future, don't see this as my research process. I was very interested that Nuuk, which I believe it isn't a capital, but it's like a centre.
It is the capital.
Because I heard it was debated whether they call it a capital, if you can have a capital if it's... Anyway, that's that.
It's the main city. However you want to describe it, it's the main city.
Just fact checked by Ros. Yep. Thank you very much. So the main city. I was intrigued that it had 4 galleries and a national theatre. This segment will come to an end very shortly. The sun doesn't set sometimes in Greenland, and there's something called like midnight sun.
Okay.
That you will only get like 2 or 3 hours, or there's a time where it's like perpetually evening, which I thought was really cool.
It's a big old place, so it depends where you are.
It depends where you are.
How far up or down you are.
There is a huge fishing industry, but Greenland is very adamant on protecting whales. So there are only certain areas where you can fish and hunt, but like the blue whale is protected, and that's it for my Piers' poorly put together.
I wish I had like a clapping thing.
Hold on.
Oh, wait.
This is it.
We did have a clapping one. Here we go.
Yay. But with that, I will say, and I hope I'm pronouncing their name right, is it Lisa Abtagina, yeah. Her video downstairs on the digital ray, just hearing local peoples talk about how uranium mining affects... I think the thing that really got me was when they were talking about the sheep and the sheep livers turning black. So I imagine that's to do with the uranium waste in water or in part of the landscape. I think that's horrible. The thing about that would be part of our food. So it's quite depressing to hear that, as Ros said earlier, things melt, there's potential for mining, yet people are going to become richer. But in terms of the people who live there and the animals and the landscape and people's health and safety, it's not good at all. So I would be a supporter of limited mining or more safer mining. Like, you can't dump stuff just because you can, and then it can poison animals and stuff.
Yeah, it feels more sinister knowing that they're going through a change in a time that is more documentable, more I don't know, with the fact that the internet is here and people can share their lived experience online and what's happening to them and through artist films like we have on the digital array downstairs, you kind of, knowing that the ice is melting and revealing such rich veins, land, mining potential. There's a certain, I don't know, it just feels really weird knowing that there's all these mining corporations or whoever it is that
circling like vultures.
Exactly, like Greenland is just being circled by sharks.
But just because there's an opportunity doesn't mean you shouldn't treat that place with respect. It's as if we'll come, we'll take as quick as possible, we'll make enough money and we'll leave. Can't do that to somebody's home.
Yeah, but of course the big dilemma is that Greenland itself needs an
it.
economy.
Even though in my facts...
It needs to be able to build an economy. So, it's a very kind of complex thing.
Double-edged
sword. Of course,
sword.
there's lots of mixed opinion within Greenland. There's not a mass consensus as to what's the right thing to do and what's the wrong thing to do.
But this is what's so...
It's very finely kind of nuanced.
It's very nuanced. It's also very relatable, even though this is happening in Greenland. This happens in the UK. Recently, there was a huge debate around fracking and opening coal factories again. Do we need that? Some will argue yes, some will argue no. So, again, this exhibition is incredibly contemporary. It's poignant. And even though, as Ros said earlier, Pia makes work about Greenland, doesn't mean it's not relatable to everywhere else in the world. So,
yeah, well said. I think that takes us nicely onto round 3, and that's our audience questions. Now, Ros, I can see your eyes on our very fancy bowl over here, and this has stayed with us. It's sort of like the third host of On the Gallery Floor, and we don't have a name for it yet.
In the gallery bowl.
In the gallery bowl. Let me just give that a jostle. So I know you like to hear a bit of ASMR for everyone. Oh, there you go. I'll give you the bowl, and you can start going crazy.
Okay, guys, shall I do some
Just
rustling?
go quick fire round, Ros. Quick fire round.
The audience love that.
Bam, bam, bam.
Okay, right. So Jason asks, do you have a formula for curation, or is it kind of made up as you go along? How do you do it?
Which you sort of answered a bit earlier, but go on.
As time goes on and the more of these things you do and the more people you work with, you gauge what's good, what's not good, you gauge better ways to go about things. And, so you learn, basically. You learn as you go what works, what doesn't work.
Is a lot of it like a feeling? Do you just have I know that fits there and this fits there? So
there's certainly a lot of gut instinct that goes on. But that doesn't, I suppose, realistically, that doesn't come from nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
That does come as a result of having kind of done it lots, if you know what I mean. It's like with all sorts of, walks of life. You do it long enough, you get a sense of what you should be doing. You can't always articulate why you think that is a right decision and something else is a wrong decision. Sometimes you're not always quite sure, but you kind of think, no, that feels like what we should do.
Yeah.
And you can't always explain exactly why you think that's the right thing to do, but you just kind of feel it. And I suppose that comes as a result of having, been around the block and done things a few times. You learn, you get a sense and a feel for what works and what doesn't.
Well, there you go, Jason. Stop making it up as you go along and get a feel for it, mate.
Vague, wasn't it?
Right.
Right, here we go. Next
get
question.
in
Go
there
on.
again.
All right, rummage. Okay.
We're getting through them.
Oh, in legacy, I think they mean legend.
Legend.
Yeah. Are they maps that exist, or has the artist created them? So that's from Ian. They are maps that exist. So they are historic maps. So they are maps that were from 1930s, 1940s. But they are from a Danish kind cartographer who was map making of the area way back then. And it's the same map in every image. So so basically Arke got 5 versions of the same map. So each one is exactly the same. But obviously she's worked over the top of it in different ways. And it's a map of Scoresby Sund, or the area around Scoresby Sund, which is where she was born. So it's an actual cartographic historic map that she has appropriated and worked on.
Brilliant.
To make the works.
Get back in there, Ros. Here we go.
Right, okay, back in the bowl. Okay. Jean-Marie asks, what is it like to handle work by an artist who is no longer alive? It's a honour and a privilege, without sounding too cheesy. It feels like a real privilege, actually, to work with the work of someone who's no longer around. And it's that sense of responsibility as well to the person, to their, and being conscious of having to represent them kind of properly, or in a sensitive way at least. And that consciousness that what you're doing is going to be on their biography in years to come.
Yeah.
This show will be listed as one of her shows.
Of course.
It will be the first big show outside of, the Nordic countries. It will be, it will, fit into a little slot.
Yeah.
On her biography.
As you said,
that people will
nice
look
small
back
thing
on.
You won't lose sleep over.
And the book, of course, because we've done a book. So we've got a book that's coming out about the show.
There'll be more information.
It's about Arke, actually, not just about the show. It's about Arke. And that too is forming part of the legacy. It's forming part of the material about that artist that will be referred to in years to come. So that feels massively daunting and a massive responsibility.
The rocking back and forth really intensifies.
So yeah, you're conscious, you've got to get it right. Okay, so next one. Oh, now, Alice, you've asked an impossible question. Alice asks, if you could live with one piece of Arke's work, which one would that be and why?
Ooh.
Oh. It's that classic, which is your favourite child question, isn't it? Virtually impossible to choose. The one with the kamik, put your kamik on your head so everyone can see where you come from.
This one conveniently right here. I like that.
That's looming on Luke's shoulder. I do absolutely adore that piece.
What do you like about it?
Makes me smile.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny. And Arke was funny. It's kind of, she deals with very serious stuff, but she had a good sense of humour. She knew, she had a twinkle in her eye, I think, when she made certain pieces. So I like that I find that an incredibly endearing piece that I just love. But if you had to live with just one little thing, I think probably I would pick one of the little self-portraits. Just because they are so exquisitely beautiful little things. And they kind of encapsulate, I suppose. I mean, obviously, what she did was a lot broader than those, of course. But for me, they kind of sum up a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
So
I
think
that.
probably, one of the little self-portraits.
Mm-hmm.
Fab.
Right. Dive back in. We'll do, how many more do you want to do, Piers? What do you think?
Shall we go quick fire 3 more?
Let's do it.
Right, okay, so next one. So Nathan asks, along with Pia, who else inspires you? In terms of, I suppose, shows that we've done here, I guess perhaps that's a good way to narrow it down a bit. Particular moments in terms of other shows we've done. I think one of my most kind of amazing memories, I mean, of course they're all amazing, and, I've loved all our shows, but one that really sticks with me. And again, it's somebody who's no longer with us, sadly, but was when we did the show with Nancy Holt and Robert Smithson. Obviously, Robert Smithson was not around at the time, but Nancy was. And we worked with Nancy. And that was kind of a bit mind-blowing for, little old us in Southampton to be working with such a legend. So working with Nancy was amazing. And she definitely was inspirational in terms of what she did, kind of land art and all of that really amazing work that kind of went on in the 1960s and beyond, of course. So, yeah, she was amazing in terms of just being an individual to work with. She felt like that felt like a very kind of special experience to have that chance to work with Nancy. Oh. Okay, so Fiona has asked, how did you become a curator?
Ooh, good question.
I did a fine art degree at Winchester School of Art. I kind of started my course thinking I was going to emerge as some little fledgling artist, which I kind of did, but then quite quickly realised I was not much cop, really. So I think it's that thing of you really realise quite soon whether actually, you're going to be much good at this or not. I personally came to a realisation that even though I absolutely loved doing a fine art degree and I would never have done anything else, I actually was more interested in making shows than making work. And actually what I loved was working with other people and supporting artists to make shows. That's kind of what I realised was my kind of stronger point than actually being an artist myself. But, however, I think doing a fine art degree was invaluable because what it gave me was a kind of understanding and empathy with how artists work, how work is made, the kind of processes involved, the kind of thinking that's involved. So I had a kind of, albeit, limited, but I had a degree of understanding of what goes into making work. And, even though I'd had many failed attempts to do it myself, through that process of actually doing a fine art degree, I think it gave me some good kind of, gave me a good kind of grounding, I suppose, in working with artists. So, I did work out fairly early on that I was probably a bit better at helping other people make shows than make them myself. So that's how it all kind of came about, really. But that was a long time ago.
And here we are now.
Yeah. So, I started doing everything, sweeping the floor, making the tea. I still sweep the floor and make the tea. But, I did all of that stuff over the years.
Cool.
And it's been an amazing ride, as they say.
Okay. Final one.
One more. Okay. So this would be a whole podcast all in itself, wouldn't it? About working in curating.
That could be arranged.
Took the words out of my mouth.
So, Charlie, you've got the grand finale question. What is your advice for young emerging curators?
Ooh.
Okay. Just keep informed, keep up with what's going on, keep connected. And actually that is so much more straightforward to do than it used to be. When I was emerging all those donkeys years ago, you had your art magazines and bits and bobs like that, but you didn't have emails, you didn't have social media, you didn't, so actually being connected was not quite as straightforward as it is now. So nowadays, it is very easy to keep connected and to find out what's going on. get yourself on mailing lists, get yourself on, every networking opportunity possible. Basically keep, and if you're not quite sure what places to connect with, then, talk to people like me, talk to people who kind of work in the business, ask their advice, say, who should I, what organisations should I connect with? What should I, how should I keep in touch with what's going on? So yeah, absolutely, keep connected and keep in touch, and build your own networks as well. I mean, depending on who it is that you're, mates with, who you work with, kind of create your own little networks as well. I mean, that's always useful because, so many people start out and actually they start out doing DIY type stuff. They generate stuff for themselves. They do some, they like, they'll do like a little pop-up show, or they'll do a little kind of one-off event or something like that they self-generate. So, if you have the ability to do things like that, then do it. Make things happen. You may get, 2 men and a dog turning up, but that doesn't really matter. Just do stuff. Your mates will come. Just be proactive.
Well, I think making stuff happen, things. Yeah, it's a huge thing. Like you say, you saw Piers' work 10 years ago, whatever it was. You've made it happen.
Yeah,
it's
you just
now.
have to kind of like bite the bullet and go.
Yeah.
And talk to people like us. Talk to people who work in these organisations, because you'll pick up all sorts of bits of insight. So, you've done the right, you've made a start by asking a question.
It starts here, guys.
Yeah, so that's good. So, yeah, just ask people things. There's all sorts of people who will be willing to share their knowledge and experience. So just ask the questions, don't be coy.
Well, Ros, thank you so much for joining us here in Gallery 2. Before we leave, we would like to plug the book launch that's coming up.
That is Saturday, the 4th of May. So you can book online, come along. You'll hear from Ros.
Yes. And some of the contributors to the publication.
And you'll get a swanky new book. Yum, yum, yum.
Ooh.
The book's going to be, is a bit special.
Yeah, very special. Very exciting as well. What a lovely way to round off the exhibition.
Ros, thank you very much for joining us.
It's a pleasure.
Thanks, Ros.
Thank you.
Pia Arke, Arctic Hysteria, the partner exhibition to Silences and Stories, will be shown at KW Institute for Contemporary Art in Berlin from the 6th of July to the 20th of October 2024. Both exhibitions have been organised in close cooperation with the Pia Arke estate and include loans from major Scandinavian collections, including Louisiana Museum of Art and Kunstmuseum Brantz in Denmark, Malmö Art Museum in Sweden, as well as numerous private lenders and the estate itself. A book on the work of Pia Arke and its wider context has been co-published by John Hansard Gallery and KW Institute and will be launched alongside a seminar event on the 4th of May 2024. You can purchase this book by visiting our bookshop.
Thank you very much for listening. If you would like to learn more about On the Gallery Floor podcast, then please visit www.jhg.art.
You can now connect with us on Instagram via the handle @onthegalleryfloor, or you can email onthegalleryfloor@outlook.com. Go on, send us a message if you've got any questions or if you'd like to work with us.
We'll be back for more next time on the Gallery Floor.